42 years of being a mother, and my own daughter told me I was a murderer at her father's funeral. My name is Margarita. I'm 68 years old, and the story I'm about to share might make you reconsider everything you believe about a mother's love. When does sacrifice become self-destruction? When does protecting your children mean losing yourself completely? For 15 years, I let my daughter hate me. I accepted her blame, her cruelty, her accusations that I destroyed her father. I thought silence was the price of love, keeping the truth buried to preserve her memories of him. But the day Scott died, everything changed. A will, a secret exposed, and suddenly I had to face a truth I'd been avoiding. Sometimes loving someone doesn't mean accepting their abuse. Before we begin this journey through betrayal, revelation, and the hardest kind of forgiveness, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Now, let me take you back to the morning that started it all. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in October. I remember the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock, unable to sleep, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Charles's name lit up the screen. "Mom?" His voice was soft, careful, the tone he used when delivering bad news. "I need to tell you something about Dad." Dad. Even after 15 years of divorce, my children still called Scott their dad, and I was grateful for that small mercy. Whatever had happened between us, I'd never wanted to poison their relationship with their father. "He passed away last night, Mom. Heart attack. The doctor said it was quick." I sat up in bed, my hand pressed against my chest, as if I could feel the echo of Scott's stopped heart in my own. We'd been married for 27 years. Even after everything, the drinking, the anger, that terrible night, part of me still remembered the man who'd brought me daisies every Friday when we were young. "The funeral is Thursday at Whitfield Memorial," Charles continued. "Mom, I think you should come." Before I could respond, I heard muffled voices in the background. Charles's tone shifted, becoming defensive. "She has every right to—" "No, Katrina, that's not—" The phone changed hands. My daughter's voice cut through like ice. "Mother," she hadn't called me Mom in years, "I know Charles told you about the funeral. Don't come. Katrina, I just want to pay my respects." "Respects?" Her laugh was bitter, sharp enough to draw blood. "You destroyed him. You left him when he needed you most, and he drank himself to death because of it. His liver, his heart, everything failed because you abandoned him. You're the reason he's dead." Each word landed like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white against the black case. In the background, I heard Charles protesting, trying to get the phone back. "If you have any decency left," Katrina continued, "you'll stay away. His family doesn't want you there. I don't want you there. You've done enough damage." The line went dead. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, the silence pressing in from all sides. 15 years of this. 15 years of being the villain in my daughter's story, the woman who broke her father's heart and drove him to drink. If only she knew the truth. But that was exactly why she couldn't know, because the truth would destroy her memories of the father she idolized. Charles arrived at my apartment 2 hours later, using the spare key I'd given him. He found me in the kitchen, mechanically making coffee I wouldn't drink. "Mom, you're going to that funeral." I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "She can't ban you from a public service," he said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. "You were married to him for almost 3 decades. You have every right to say goodbye. Your sister is wrong." Charles reached across the table and took my hands. His were warm, steady, so different from his father's had been in those final years. "Mom, you've suffered enough for something that wasn't your fault." There it was, that careful dance we'd done for 15 years, him knowing the truth, but never saying it outright, me maintaining the fiction that protected Katrina's illusions. "I can't cause a scene at his funeral," I said. "It wouldn't be right." "You won't cause anything. Katrina will, maybe, but that's on her, not you." He squeezed my hands gently. "Mom, please. You need closure, too." Closure. As if attending a funeral could somehow close the wound that had been festering for 15 years. But looking at my son's earnest face, I found myself nodding. "I'll sit in the back," I said. "I'll be invisible." Charles's expression was sad but understanding. "You shouldn't have to be invisible, Mom. Not anymore." But we both knew I would be. It was the price I'd chosen to pay, and I'd keep paying it as long as necessary. What I didn't know then was that Scott had left one final surprise that would change everything. Thursday arrived wrapped in gray clouds and drizzle, as if the weather itself was mourning. I chose my clothes carefully. A simple black dress, nothing that would draw attention. I even wore the pearl earrings Scott had given me for our 10th anniversary, though I wasn't sure why. Sentiment, maybe, or perhaps a small act of defiance. Whitfield Memorial Funeral Home sat on a tree-lined street in the main line, all red brick and white columns, trying its best to look like a home rather than what it was. I arrived 20 minutes after the service started, slipping through the heavy wooden doors like a shadow. The chapel was packed. The Holloway family had deep roots in Philadelphia society, and it showed. I recognized Patricia, Scott's sister, in the front row, her silver hair perfectly coiffed despite her grief. Ronald, his older brother, sat beside her, his wife clutching his arm. And there, in the very front, was Katrina. My daughter looked beautiful in her grief, tragic and elegant in a way I'd never been. She held her husband David's hand while their teenage daughter, Emma, leaned against her shoulder. A perfect family portrait of loss. I found an empty spot in the last pew, behind a large flower arrangement that partially obscured me from view. The minister was speaking about Scott's dedication to his business, his love for his family. No mention of the drinking, of course. No mention of the wife who'd left him. In death, Scott had become the man everyone wanted to remember. I was so focused on staying invisible that I didn't notice Patricia had spotted me. She whispered something to Ronald, who turned to look. The whispers spread like ripples in a pond, and within moments, I felt the weight of dozens of eyes. Then Katrina turned. Our eyes met across the chapel, and I saw the exact moment her grief transformed into rage. She stood abruptly, ignoring David's attempt to hold her back, and started walking toward me. The minister faltered mid-sentence. The entire room held its breath. "How dare you?" Katrina's voice carried in the sudden silence. "How dare you show your face here?" I stood slowly, my legs trembling. "Katrina, please." "No!" She was in front of me now, her face flushed with fury. "You don't get to play the grieving widow. You gave up that right when you abandoned him." "That's enough, Katrina." Charles had appeared from somewhere, stepping between us. "This isn't the time or place." "She shouldn't be here." Katrina's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "She destroyed him. He started drinking because of her. His liver failed because of her. She killed him as surely as if she'd put a gun to his head." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. I felt every eye in the chapel on me, judging, condemning. Patricia stood up, her voice cutting through the tension. "You have some nerve showing up here, Margarita, after everything you put my brother through." "She has every right to be here," Charles said firmly, but his voice was drowned out by the murmurs of agreement with Patricia. Ronald joined in. "Scott never recovered from what you did to him. The least you could do is respect his memory by staying away." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to scream the truth, that Scott's drinking had started long before I left, that I'd endured years of his drunken rages before that final, terrible night. But looking at Katrina's devastated face, I couldn't do it. She needed her father to be the victim, not the perpetrator. "I'll go," I said quietly. "Mom, no," Charles started, but I touched his arm gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'll go." I turned to leave, my dignity hanging by a thread, when a man in a dark suit approached. James Fitzgerald, I realized, Scott's attorney. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said quietly, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm sorry for the disturbance, but I need to inform you that your presence is required at the reading of Mr. Holloway's will tomorrow. 10 a.m., my office." The chapel erupted in shocked whispers. Katrina's face went pale. "Why would she need to be there?" Patricia demanded. Fitzgerald's expression remained professionally neutral. Mr. Holloway's instructions were quite specific. Mrs. Whitmore must be present. He handed me a business card and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving me standing there with every eye boring into me, wondering what Scott could possibly have left to say. The offices of Fitzgerald and Associates occupied the top floor of a gleaming tower in downtown Philadelphia. I arrived 15 minutes early, my stomach churning with anxiety. Charles met me in the lobby, having insisted on coming despite my protests. "You don't have to protect me," I told him as we rode the elevator up. "Someone has to," he replied, and the fierce protectiveness in his voice made my eyes sting with unshed tears. The conference room was all dark wood and leather, old money trying to look timeless. Patricia and Ronald were already there, along with their spouses. A few other Holloway relatives I vaguely recognized occupied the remaining chairs, and then Katrina walked in with David. "Why is she here?" Katrina demanded immediately, pointing at me like I was something contaminating the room. "As I explained yesterday," Fitzgerald said calmly, settling behind the massive oak desk, "Mr. Holloway specifically requested Mrs. Whitmore's presence." "It's probably just to officially exclude her from everything," Patricia said, her tone suggesting this would be the only acceptable outcome. "To make it legal that she gets nothing." "We'll see," Fitzgerald said, pulling out a sealed envelope. "Before we begin, I should note that Mr. Holloway updated this will 6 months ago. He was of sound mind and body at the time, and everything was properly witnessed and notarized." 6 months ago. I tried to remember. Had something happened? Some diagnosis that made him think about his mortality? "He was drinking heavily 6 months ago," Katrina said, as if reading my thoughts. "Can we contest based on that?" "Mr. Holloway was sober when he signed these documents," Fitzgerald replied. "I can attest to that personally." Ronald leaned forward. "Just get on with it. We all know Scott would take care of his real family." The emphasis on real wasn't lost on me. After 15 years, I was still the outsider who'd broken up their perfect family narrative. Fitzgerald broke the seal and unfolded the documents. "I'll start with the smaller bequests. To my siblings, Patricia and Ronald, I leave my collection of first edition books, to be divided equally between them." Patricia nodded, satisfied. It was a valuable collection, worth probably $50,000. To my daughter Katrina's child Emma, I establish a trust fund of $100,000 for her college education. David squeezed Katrina's hand. It was generous, appropriate. "The remainder of my estate," Fitzgerald continued, and I noticed his slight pause, "including my investment portfolio, the house in Gladwine, and all other assets, I divide as follows." The room held its breath. 60% to my former wife, Margarita Whitmore. The explosion was immediate. "What?" Katrina shot to her feet. "That's impossible." 30% to my son, Charles Whitmore, Fitzgerald continued over the chaos, and 10% to my daughter, Katrina Morrison. The room erupted. Patricia was shouting about fraud. Ronald was demanding to see the documents. But Katrina just stared at me with such hatred that I felt physically cold. "You manipulated him," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Somehow you got to him. Maybe you were seeing him behind our backs. Maybe you—" "I haven't spoken to your father in 3 years," I said quietly. "Not since Emma's middle school graduation." "Then why?" Katrina's voice broke. "Why would he do this?" Fitzgerald cleared his throat. "There's more. Mr. Holloway left a personal message to be read aloud." "Read it," Charles said, his jaw tight. Fitzgerald adjusted his glasses. "To my family, I leave you my love and my apologies. I was not the man you deserved. To Margarita, I leave the majority of my estate not as a gift, but as a debt partially repaid. I owe you more than money can ever compensate for what I took from you that night 15 years ago. I'm sorry for the broken glass, the blood, and my shame. I'm sorry for the silence I let you keep." The words hung in the air like a confession, without details. I felt Charles's hand find mine under the table, squeezing hard. "What does that mean?" Katrina demanded. "What night? What silence?" But I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up entirely, memories of that night flooding back. Scott's rage, Charles's scream, the weight of the vase in my hands, the blood on the kitchen floor. "We'll contest this," Patricia announced. "This is clearly the rambling of a drunk man. No court will uphold it." But looking at Fitzgerald's calm expression, I suspected Scott had made sure it would stand. "This is fraud." Katrina's voice rose to a near shriek. "She must have forged this, or manipulated him when he was drunk. There's no way my father would leave her anything, let alone 60%. Fitzgerald remained unmoved by the chaos. He pulled out another document, sliding it across the table. "This is a letter from Dr. Harrison at Jefferson Hospital, confirming that your father was completely sober during a voluntary 48-hour observation period before signing the will. He wanted to ensure there could be no questions about his mental state." "Then he was coerced," Ronald said, his face red with anger. "Margarita must have threatened him somehow." "With what?" Charles interjected, his voice sharp. "Mom hasn't had contact with him in years. How exactly would she coerce him?" "You don't know that," Patricia snapped. "Maybe they were meeting in secret. Maybe she was blackmailing him about something." The irony of that accusation, that I was blackmailing Scott when I'd kept his worst secret for 15 years, would have been laughable if it wasn't so painful. "I want to see bank records," Katrina demanded. "Phone records. If she contacted him—" "Your father anticipated these concerns," Fitzgerald interrupted, producing yet another folder. "He provided a sworn affidavit stating that Mrs. Whitmore never contacted him, never asked for money, and never knew about his intentions regarding the will. He also included this." He pulled out a bank statement. My name was highlighted in multiple entries, but not as a recipient, as a sender. "These are child support payments," Fitzgerald explained. "Mrs. Whitmore continued sending $500 monthly to your father for 3 years after the divorce, even though she had primary custody of Charles and was under no legal obligation to provide support." I felt everyone's eyes on me. I'd never told anyone about those payments, not even Charles. It had felt like blood money, payment for my silence, for taking the blame. "That doesn't make sense," Katrina said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "Why would she pay him?" "Because Mom always tries to do the right thing," Charles said quietly, "even when no one deserves it." "Don't defend her," Katrina turned on her brother. "She's poisoned you against Dad for years. That's why you barely visited him." "I barely visited him because—" Charles stopped himself, jaw clenched. "Because what?" Patricia demanded. "What lies did she tell you?" "Mom never said a word against Dad," Charles said carefully. "Not once in 15 years. It was true. I'd been so careful, so determined that my children would have at least the memory of a father worth loving. Every bitter word I'd swallowed, every truth I'd buried, it had all been for them." "The estate is worth approximately $3 million, Fitzgerald continued, clearly trying to regain control of the meeting. "Mrs. Whitmore's portion would be $1.8 million. Charles would receive $900,000. Katrina, $300,000 plus the house contents she specifically requested." "$300,000?" Katrina repeated numbly. "He left me, his daughter who stood by him, who took care of him, who visited every week. $300,000. And her, the woman who abandoned him, $1.8 million. "Your father's letter explains—" Fitzgerald began. "Explains what?" Katrina stood, her hands flat on the table. "That he owed her? For what? For leaving? For breaking his heart? For turning him into an alcoholic?" "Katrina," I finally found my voice, "your father's drinking wasn't—" "Don't you dare," she cut me off. "Don't you dare make excuses now that he's dead and can't defend himself." "Then let's talk about what he could defend," Charles said, his control finally snapping. "Let's talk about why Mom really left." "Charles, no," I said urgently, but he was beyond stopping. "You want to know what that night was? You want to know what Dad was apologizing for?" "Charles, please," I begged, but Katrina was already turning to him, her face hungry for answers that would vindicate her hatred. "Tell me," she demanded. "Tell me what lies she's fed you." "They're not lies," Charles said. "I was there." The room went silent. Even Patricia and Ronald seemed to sense that something significant was about to be revealed. "You were 13, Katrina said slowly. "What could you possibly remember that I don't?" "I remember everything," Charles replied, his voice steady but his hands shaking. "I remember Dad coming home drunk. I remember him screaming at Mom about dinner being cold. I remember trying to defend her." "That's not—" "I remember him grabbing a knife from the kitchen drawer," Charles continued, each word falling like a stone into still water. "I remember Mom screaming. I remember the sound the glass vase made when she hit him with it to stop him from stabbing me." The silence that followed was deafening. Katrina's face had gone white, her mouth open but no words coming out. "No," she finally whispered. "You're making that up. Dad would never—" "I have a scar," Charles said simply, 3 inches long on my ribs where the knife caught me before Mom stopped him. "Would you like to see it?" The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Everything Katrina believed, everything she'd built her hatred on, was crumbling in real time. And I could only watch, my secret finally exposed, as my daughter's world collapsed around her. At this moment, sitting in that conference room with all those accusing eyes on me, I wanted nothing more than to disappear. But you know what? Sometimes life pushes us to the edge, not to make us fall, but to teach us we can fly. If you've ever felt wrongly accused but couldn't speak up, if you've ever sacrificed your own truth to protect someone you love, please hit that like button to support stories like mine. And subscribe if you want to hear how this all ends. Leave a comment. What would you do in my position? Keep silent to protect your child's memories, or reveal the truth and shatter their illusions? The story's not over yet. "You're lying," Katrina said, but her voice lacked conviction. She was grasping for the rage that had sustained her for 15 years, but it was slipping through her fingers like water. "You're both lying. Dad would never hurt Charles. He loved us." "He did love you," I said gently. "That's why I never told you. He was a different man when he was sober, Katrina. The father you remember, that was real too." "Don't," she warned, backing away from the table. "Don't you dare try to manipulate me with your fake sympathy." Fitzgerald cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should continue with the reading. There's more to your father's message." "More?" Ronald said incredulously. "What more could there be?" Fitzgerald continued reading. "I know this revelation will cause pain, and for that, I'm sorry. But Margarita has carried my shame for 15 years, allowing herself to be vilified to protect my relationship with Katrina. She never told anyone that I came to the house drunk that night, that I threatened Charles, that she had to defend him. She never told anyone about the other times, the broken furniture, the holes in walls, the bruises she covered with makeup. Each word was another crack in the facade I'd maintained for so long. Charles reached for my hand again, and this time I let him take it, needing the anchor. "She never pressed charges," Fitzgerald continued reading. "She never demanded more in the divorce. She just took Charles and left, and when Katrina chose to stay with me, Margarita respected that choice even though it broke her heart. She knew Katrina would be safe with me. I never raised a hand to my daughter, only to my wife and son." "Only?" Patricia said, incredulous. "As if that makes it better?" "It doesn't," I said quietly. "But it was the reasoning I used to let her stay. I knew he'd never hurt her. She was his princess. It was just Charles and me who triggered his rage." "Stop it!" Katrina pressed her hands to her ears. "Stop talking about him like he was some kind of monster." "He wasn't a monster," Charles said firmly. "He was sick. Alcoholism is a disease, Kat. But that doesn't mean Mom had to stay and be his punching bag." "He never hit anyone," Katrina insisted. "I lived with him for years after you left. He never—" "Because Mom and I were his triggers," Charles interrupted. "You said it yourself. He started drinking more after we left. But what you didn't know was that he drank because he remembered what he'd done. The guilt ate at him." David, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. "Katrina, honey, maybe we should—" "No!" She turned on her husband. "You don't get to take their side. You don't get to believe these lies." "What if they're not lies?" David asked gently. "What if—" "Then my whole life is a lie." Katrina's voice broke completely. Then every horrible thing I said to my mother, every birthday she missed because I wouldn't let her come, every holiday she spent alone. She stopped, the weight of her words settling over her like a shroud. Patricia stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. Even if, and I'm not saying I believe this, but even if Scott had some issues, that doesn't justify giving her nearly $2 million. Doesn't it? Charles stood too, facing his aunt. 15 years of being hated by her own daughter. 15 years of being blamed for everything. 15 years of keeping silent to protect Katrina's relationship with Dad. What's that worth? She could have told the truth, Ronald said. And destroyed Katrina's relationship with her father? I finally stood, finding my voice. What kind of mother would I be if I did that? She loved him. She needed him. And he was good to her. He never drank around her, never lost his temper with her. Why would I take that away? So you just let her hate you instead, David said, understanding dawning in his eyes. A mother's love isn't always about being loved in return, I said, looking directly at Katrina. Sometimes it's about making yourself the villain so your child can have a hero. Katrina was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. I can't. I need to leave. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, David hurrying after her. At the threshold, she turned back. If this is true, she said, her voice barely a whisper, if you really kept this secret to protect me, then why reveal it now? Why let Charles tell me? I met her eyes, those same green eyes she'd inherited from her father. Because I'm tired, Katrina. I'm 68 years old, and I'm tired of being the villain in your story. Your father's gone. You're grown. The truth can't hurt him anymore, and maybe it's time it stopped hurting us. She left without another word, the door closing behind her with a soft click that sounded like an ending. Or perhaps, I hoped, a beginning. The door had barely closed behind Katrina when Patricia rounded on me, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You think you've won, don't you? She moved closer, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my chest. 15 years of playing the martyr, and now you cash in. Patricia, that's not... Don't! She cut me off. My brother is dead, and you couldn't even let him rest in peace without destroying his memory. Mom didn't destroy anything, Charles said, stepping protectively closer to me. Dad did that himself. You were a child, Ronald joined in, his bulk intimidating as he stood. Children misremember things. Maybe you saw something, but you're exaggerating. I have medical records, Charles said flatly, from the ER that night. Would you like to see them? Forged, probably, Patricia said, but her certainty was wavering. This whole thing is a setup. She planned this. How could I plan Scott writing his will? I asked, exhaustion seeping into every word. I didn't even know I was in it until today. Maybe you didn't know the details, Ronald conceded, but you knew something. Why else would you show up at the funeral? Because despite everything, I loved him once, I said simply. We had 27 years together before it went bad. 2 children, a life. Was I supposed to pretend none of that mattered? It shouldn't matter, Patricia's voice rose. You left him. You abandoned him when he needed help. I left him because he tried to kill our son, Charles said, his patience finally exhausted. How many times does that need to be said? Once is enough to be a lie, Patricia shot back. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I could feel the walls of accusation closing in, 15 years of buried pain rising to the surface. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. You want to know what I think? Patricia continued, her voice venomous. I think you've been planning this for years, keeping Charles close, turning him against his father, waiting for Scott to die so you could swoop in. Swoop into what? I finally snapped, my composure breaking. To be humiliated at his funeral? To be called a murderer by my own daughter? To sit here and be accused by people who never lifted a finger to help when Scott was destroying our family? The room went silent at my outburst. Patricia's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Where were you? I continued, years of suppressed anger finally finding voice. When Scott came home drunk 4 nights a week? Where were you when he put his fist through the wall next to Charles's head? Where were you when I called you begging for help and you told me that marriage was about commitment and I should try harder? I never, Patricia started. December 15th, 2008, I said. I called you at 11 p.m. Scott had just thrown a bottle at me. You told me to stop being dramatic and that all marriages had rough patches. Patricia's face flushed. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, I corrected. None of you did. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, to maintain the Holloway family image. And when I finally left, when I couldn't take it anymore, it was easier to blame me than to admit Scott had a problem. He got help after you left, Ronald said defensively. He got help because I left, I corrected. Because without me and Charles to blame for his drinking, he had to face the truth. But by then, Katrina had already decided I was the villain, and I let her because at least that way she still had one parent she could love without reservation. So noble, Patricia sneered, but it sounded hollow now. Saint Margarita, the martyred mother. I'm no saint, I said tiredly. I'm just a mother who made an impossible choice. Keep quiet and be hated, or speak up and destroy my daughter's relationship with her father. I chose silence. Right or wrong, I chose to protect her. And now? Ronald asked. Now you're destroying it anyway. Now she's an adult, Charles interjected. Now she needs the truth more than she needs the fairy tale. Mom's given up enough. 15 years of being the bad guy. Isn't that enough penance for the crime of protecting her children? Fitzgerald, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. If I may, there's one more thing Mr. Holloway wanted me to share. We all turned to him, emotionally exhausted, but unable to look away. He left a receipt, Fitzgerald said, pulling out a faded piece of paper. From a pawn shop. Mrs. Whitmore, do you recognize this? I looked at the paper and felt my knees go weak. It was for my mother's wedding ring, the one I'd pawned to pay for Charles's medical bills after that night because I didn't want to use Scott's insurance and have to explain the injury. He bought it back, Fitzgerald said gently. He wanted you to have it. It's in the safety deposit box listed in the will. That small gesture, that tiny acknowledgement of what he'd cost me, finally broke through my defenses. I sank into the chair, tears I'd held back for 15 years finally falling. Crocodile tears, Patricia muttered, but even she seemed shaken by the receipt. This proves nothing except that Scott felt guilty about something. Maybe she manipulated him into feeling guilty. How? Charles's voice was dangerously quiet. How exactly did Mom manipulate him from a distance, with no contact, for 15 years? Maybe not directly, Ronald suggested, grasping at straws. Maybe through you. Maybe you've been feeding him stories. Stop! The voice came from an unexpected source, David, who had quietly returned to the room. Just stop. Can't you see what you're doing? Where's Katrina? I asked immediately, concerned despite everything. In the car. She's processing. David looked around the room with disgust. And listening to all of you, I understand why she's struggling. You're so busy protecting Scott's image that you can't see the truth staring you in the face. You don't know our family, Patricia said coldly. I know enough, David replied. I know that for 10 years, I've watched my wife torment herself over her relationship with her mother. I know she's had therapy for her anger issues, anger she inherited from somewhere. And I know that every time she had a glass of wine, she'd panic about becoming like her father. That's not, Ronald started. And I know, David continued, his voice rising, that Charles flinches whenever someone raises their voice, that he positions himself between his mother and any potential threat, even in social situations. Those aren't the behaviors of someone who made up a story. Those are trauma responses. The truth of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Charles unconsciously proved David's point by stepping closer to me, his body angled protectively. We should go, Mom, Charles said quietly. We have what we came for. Not yet, Fitzgerald interjected. There are papers to sign. The estate needs to be properly transferred. We're contesting this, Patricia announced, though with less conviction than before. On what grounds? Fitzgerald asked mildly. Mr. Holloway was sober, of sound mind, and under no duress. The will is properly witnessed and notarized. You have no case. We'll find one, Ronald said stubbornly. No, you won't. A new voice from the doorway. Katrina had returned. Her face was blotchy from crying, but her expression was determined. You won't contest anything. Katrina, sweetheart, Patricia started, moving toward her niece. Don't. Katrina held up a hand. I just called St. Mary's Hospital. They confirmed Charles was treated for a knife wound on March 15, 2009. The record lists it as a domestic incident. The room went completely silent. I also called Detective Morrison, no relation despite the name. He retired 5 years ago, but he remembered the case. Mom refused to press charges, said it was an accident. He never believed her, but without her cooperation, there was nothing he could do. Each word seemed to physically pain her, but she pressed on. And I called Mom's old friend, Susan. She told me about the bruises she saw, about the time Mom showed up at her house at 2 a.m. with Charles, both of them terrified, about how Mom made her promise never to tell me. Katrina, I started, but she shook her head. I'm not done. She turned to Patricia and Ronald. You knew. Maybe not the details, but you knew something was wrong. You chose to look away. And when Mom finally left, you chose to blame her because it was easier than admitting your brother was an abuser. Katrina, your father loved you, Patricia said desperately. I know he did, Katrina replied. That's what makes this so hard. He was a wonderful father to me, loving, supportive, never raised his voice, but that doesn't erase what he did to Mom and Charles. She turned to me then, and the pain in her eyes was almost unbearable. 15 years, she said. 15 years you let me hate you. 15 years of horrible things I said, birthdays you missed, Christmases alone. Why? Because you loved him, I said simply. And you deserve to have that love untainted. Every child deserves at least one parent they can believe in completely. But what about what you deserved? Katrina's voice broke. What about Charles? Charles had me, I said. And I had Charles. We had each other. You had your father. It seemed balanced. Balanced? Katrina laughed bitterly. You call this balanced? I've spent 15 years hating the wrong person. I've said unforgivable things. Nothing is unforgivable between a mother and daughter, I interrupted. Nothing. How can you say that? She was crying again. After everything I've done. Because I'm your mother, I said simply. And mothers love unconditionally, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Charles couldn't stay silent anymore. Mom, you need to stop sacrificing yourself for everyone else. You've done enough, more than enough. He turned to Katrina. She won't say it, so I will. You owe her an apology, a massive one, and not just words, actions, years of making it right. Charles, I warned, but he shook his head. No, Mom. Enough is enough. You've protected everyone else for 15 years. It's time someone protected you. You want the truth? Charles's voice cracked with 15 years of suppressed rage. The whole truth? Not just the sanitized version Mom would tell? Charles, please. I tried to stop him, but he was beyond stopping. Dad didn't just come home drunk that night. He came home drunk and paranoid, convinced Mom was having an affair because she'd started taking evening classes. He accused her of lying, of cheating. When I tried to defend her, told him she was at school, he said I was covering for her. Katrina sank into a chair, her face pale. Patricia and Ronald stood frozen, unable to interrupt. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen drawer, not a small one, the big chef's knife Mom used for roasts. He said if she wouldn't tell the truth, he'd make me tell it. He held it to my throat first. No, Katrina whispered, but Charles continued relentlessly. Mom begged him, got on her knees, literally on her knees, begging him to let me go. She said she'd admit to anything, say anything, if he'd just put the knife down. But he was beyond reasoning, the alcohol, the paranoia. He was completely gone. David moved closer to Katrina, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as she began to shake. when he moved the knife from my throat to my ribs. When he started pressing, Mom grabbed the vase, that heavy crystal one from your wedding, Aunt Patricia. She hit him once, just hard enough to make him drop the knife, but he'd already pushed it in, 3 inches. I still remember the sound it made. I was crying now, unable to stop the memories from flooding back. The blood on Charles's shirt, Scott unconscious on the floor. The terrible moment of deciding whether to call 911 for Scott or take Charles to the hospital first. "Mom chose me," Charles said, his voice softer now. "She left Dad on the kitchen floor and drove me to the hospital. Told them I'd fallen on broken glass. They didn't believe her, but she stuck to the story. When we got home, Dad was gone. He'd woken up and left, didn't come back for 3 days. When he did come back," I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. "He didn't remember. The blackout was complete. He saw the blood, the broken vase, Charles's bandages, and I told him we'd had an accident. He believed me, or pretended to. But I remembered," Charles said. "Every detail, every word, every second of terror. And Mom knew I remembered. That's why she left. Not because of what he'd done, but because of what he might do next time." "There wouldn't have been a next time," Patricia said weakly. "Scott would never—" "There would have been," I interrupted. The drinking was getting worse, the blackouts more frequent, the anger more unpredictable. If I'd stayed, Charles or I would have ended up dead. "So you left," Katrina said numbly. "You took Charles and left, but why didn't you take me?" "I tried," I admitted. "God, how I tried. But you were 16. You had friends, school, a life built around that house. And your father, he was different with you. Gentle, sober, the father you deserved." "While you and Charles got the monster," Katrina said bitterly. "He wasn't a monster," I insisted. "He was sick. The alcohol changed him, turned him into someone else. The man who walked you down the aisle at your wedding, who held Emma when she was born, that was the real Scott, too." "How can both be real?" Katrina asked desperately. "Because people are complex," David said gently. "Addiction is complex. Your father could be a loving dad to you and an abusive husband and father to them. Both truths can exist." Fitzgerald cleared his throat. "If I may add some context, Mr. Holloway sought treatment multiple times after the divorce. He maintained sobriety for significant periods. In his letter to me, separate from the will, he expressed deep remorse for his actions." "Did he remember?" Charles asked. "Did he remember that night?" "Eventually, yes," Fitzgerald admitted. "About 5 years ago, during therapy, the memory surfaced. That's when he first attempted to contact your mother to apologize, but she refused his calls." Everyone looked at me. "I couldn't," I said simply. "I'd built this wall of silence to protect Katrina. If I'd talked to him, if I'd let him apologize, I might have broken. And if I broke, the truth would come out." "So you suffered in silence," Katrina said, tears streaming down her face. "You let me hate you, blame you, say terrible things to you, all to protect my relationship with him." "You're my daughter," I said. "I'd do it again." "That's insane," Katrina exploded. "That's not love. That's martyrdom." "Maybe," I admitted. "But it's the choice I made. Right or wrong, I made it. And I lived with it. We all lived with it." "Not anymore," Charles said firmly. "No more secrets. No more protecting everyone but yourself. Mom, you're 68 years old. You've earned the right to stop being everyone's shield." The room fell silent, the weight of 15 years of lies and truth finally fully exposed, leaving us all to figure out what came next. Charles pulled out his phone, his hand steady now that the truth was out. "You want evidence, Aunt Patricia? Here." He showed a photo of his scar, still visible after all these years, a raised pale line against his skin. 3 inches, 12 stitches. March 15th, 2009. Patricia turned away, unable to look. Ronald remained frozen, his worldview crumbling. "There's more," Fitzgerald said quietly. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "Mr. Holloway insisted I keep these in case they were needed. Hospital records. Police reports that were filed but never pursued. Photos of bruises. He documented everything once he remembered, once he got sober enough to face what he'd done. He spread the papers on the table. I couldn't look at them. I'd lived them. But Katrina leaned forward, drawn to the truth like a moth to flame. "This is Mom's medical record," she read, her voice hollow. "Bruised ribs, November 2008. Concussion, January 2009. Sprained wrist, February 2009. "I told them I was clumsy," I said quietly. "Fell downstairs, walked into doors, classic excuses." "And they believed you?" David asked, incredulous. "They knew," Charles answered for me. "But without Mom's cooperation, they couldn't do anything. She was protecting Dad, protecting Katrina's image of him." Katrina suddenly stood and ran from the room. We heard the bathroom door slam, the sound of retching. David started to follow, but I stopped him. "Let me," I said. I found her hunched over the sink, splashing water on her face. Our eyes met in the mirror, her green ones, so like her father's, filled with a pain I'd hoped to spare her from. 15 years, she whispered. 15 years of lies. 15 years of love, I corrected. Everything I did from love. "I called you a murderer," she said, her voice breaking. "At his funeral, in front of everyone, I called you a murderer. You were grieving. Stop!" She whirled around. "Stop forgiving me. Stop understanding. Be angry. Hate me. Do something other than just accept it." "I can't," I said simply. "I'm your mother. Hating you would be like hating part of myself." "I hated you," she said. "For 15 years I hated you." "I know. Doesn't that hurt?" "Every day," I admitted. "But not as much as seeing you hurt now. This is what I was trying to prevent." "By sacrificing yourself?" "By loving you the only way I could, from a distance, in silence." Katrina crumpled then, falling into my arms for the first time in 15 years. I held her while she sobbed, her body shaking with the force of her grief, for her father, for the years lost, for the mother she'd pushed away. When we finally returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. Patricia and Ronald were seated, looking older, smaller somehow. "We won't contest the will," Patricia said quietly. Scott wanted this. We'll respect his wishes." "Thank you," I said, though the words felt hollow. What was there to thank them for? Basic decency arriving 15 years late? "I don't want it," Katrina said suddenly. "The money. I don't want any of it." "Katrina," Fitzgerald started. "No, it's blood money. Payment for Mom's silence, for her suffering. I don't deserve a penny of it." "That's not your decision to make," I said firmly. "Your father wanted you to have it. It's yours." "Then I'll give it to you," she said. "I don't want your money, Katrina. I want my daughter back." The words hung in the air between us, 15 years of longing condensed into a single sentence. "I don't know how," Katrina admitted. "I don't know how to be your daughter after all this time. I don't know how to undo the damage." "We start small," I said. "Coffee, a phone call, maybe dinner sometime. We have time." "Do we?" she asked. And I heard the fear in her voice. Fear that she'd wasted too much time, that it was too late. "We have whatever time we're given," I said, "and we make the most of it." Charles stepped forward then, putting an arm around each of us. "We're family. Broken, complicated, messed up, but family. Dad's gone, but we're still here. We can choose what happens next." Fitzgerald began gathering the papers. "I'll have the estate transfers prepared. Mrs. Whitmore, Charles, you'll need to sign some documents. Katrina, your portion will be held in trust until you decide what to do with it." As we prepared to leave, Patricia approached me. "Margarita, I owe you an apology." "No," I said tiredly. "You owe me nothing. We all did what we thought was best with the information we had." But she shook her head. "I had information, I just chose to ignore it. That makes me complicit." I didn't argue. Some truths, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. We all had to live with our choices. 15 years. 15 years I kept that secret locked inside me. You know what's the hardest part? It wasn't my daughter's hatred. It was watching her worship a fantasy while I held the painful truth. But truth, even when it hurts, is necessary for healing. If this story touches your heart, if you've ever carried a burden to protect someone you love, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the ending. Can a relationship really be rebuilt after so much pain? Can forgiveness truly heal 15 years of wounds? Let's find out together. 3 months passed before I heard from Katrina again. 3 months of silence that felt different from the 15 years before. This wasn't hatred, but processing. Charles checked on her through David, but I waited, giving her the space she needed to reconcile the father she'd loved with the man he'd really been. The call came on a rainy Thursday evening in January. "Mom?" Her voice was tentative, uncertain. "It's me." "Hello, sweetheart?" I kept my voice neutral, not wanting to pressure her. "I've been seeing someone. A therapist, Dr. Rodriguez. She specializes in family trauma." "That's good," I said carefully. "She says I've been in denial about Dad's alcoholism my whole life. Even when I lived with him, I made excuses, blamed stress, work, you leaving, anything but the truth." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "I called St. Mary's Hospital," she continued. "Spoke to Dr. Patterson, who treated Charles that night. He remembered you, Mom. Said he'd never seen someone so determined to protect their attacker. He knew you were lying about the broken glass. He was kind," I remembered. "He didn't push. I also called Susan, your old friend. She told me about the other times, the bruises you explained away, the time you showed up at her house at 2 a.m. with Charles, both of you terrified. Susan was a good friend. She said she begged you to press charges, offered to testify about what she'd seen." "I couldn't," I said simply. "You would have been destroyed." "I was destroyed anyway," Katrina said, her voice breaking. "Just differently. I spent 15 years hating the wrong person, Mom. Do you understand what that's done to me? The guilt?" "You didn't know. But I should have," she interrupted. "There were signs. Dad's drinking getting worse after you left. His anger when sober, the way he'd punch walls, the way Charles flinched around him. I saw it all and chose to blame you instead. You were a child protecting herself the only way she knew how." "I was 16, then 26, then 36, Katrina corrected. "At some point, I became an adult who chose hatred over truth." "The truth wasn't yours to know," I said. "I made sure of that." "Dr. Rodriguez says that's called enabling," Katrina said. "You enabled my delusion to protect me, but it hurt us both." She wasn't wrong. In trying to shield her from pain, I'd caused a different kind of damage. "I found something," Katrina said after a pause. "In Dad's things. A letter he never sent." My heart skipped. "Oh?" "It's addressed to you, written 5 years ago when he first remembered. Do you want to know what it says?" Did I? After all this time, did I want to hear Scott's words? "Yes," I said finally. I heard paper rustling, then Katrina's voice, reading her father's words. "Margarita, I remember now. The knife, Charles's blood, your face when you hit me with the vase. Not to hurt me, but to save our son. You were right to leave, right to protect him, right to let Katrina stay with me. I never could have hurt her. She was my anchor to humanity when everything else was drowning in alcohol. I'm sorry for what I did, for what I became. But mostly, I'm sorry for the silence you've kept to protect her from the truth about me. That's a debt I can never repay, though I'll try through the will. Tell Charles I'm sorry. Tell yourself you deserved better. Don't tell Katrina unless you have to. Let her keep whatever good memories she has. Scott." The letter ended, and we both sat in silence, processing words from a dead man who'd finally found clarity too late. "He knew," Katrina said finally. "He knew what you'd sacrificed." "He was a good man fighting a terrible disease," I said. "In the end, he tried to make it right." "Can we?" Katrina asked, her voice small. "Can we make it right?" "We can try," I said. "That's all anyone can do." "Coffee?" she suggested. "Tomorrow? That little place in Ardmore you used to love?" I still love it, I said, hope blooming in my chest. 2:00? 2:00, she confirmed. Mom? I love you. I know I haven't said it in 15 years, but I never stopped. Even when I hated you, I loved you. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, I said, tears streaming down my face. I'll see you tomorrow. After she hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, feeling something I hadn't felt in 15 years, the possibility of wholeness. Not perfection, but wholeness. It was enough. The coffee shop in Ardmore hadn't changed much in 15 years. Same worn wooden tables, same smell of fresh ground beans and cinnamon, same corner booth where I used to sit with both my children when they were young. Now I sat there again, waiting for my daughter to return to me. Katrina arrived 5 minutes early, looking nervous. She'd lost weight, her face drawn with the stress of recent revelations, but when she saw me, she managed a small smile, the first genuine one she'd given me in 15 years. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. We ordered. She still took her coffee the same way, I noticed. Some things don't change, even across years of estrangement. I've been thinking about the money, she started. Dad's estate. I want to refuse my portion. No, I said firmly. Your father wanted you to have it. But it's not fair. Fair? I laughed softly. Nothing about the last 15 years has been fair, but that money is yours. Use it for Emma's future, for your family. Make something good from it. She nodded slowly, then pulled out an envelope. I brought something else. Pictures I found in Dad's things. Of us. Before. Inside were photos I hadn't seen in years. Our family at the beach when Charles was 10 and Katrina 14. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Before the drinking got bad. Before that terrible night. We looked happy, she said wonderingly. We were happy, I confirmed. For a long time we were. How do you separate it? She asked. The good from the bad? The father who taught me to ride a bike from the man who hurt you and Charles? You don't separate it, I said. You accept that both existed. People aren't all good or all bad, Katrina. Your father loved you completely. He also hurt Charles and me terribly. Both truths exist. Dr. Rodriguez says I have to grieve 2 losses, Katrina said. The father who died and the father I thought I had. That sounds about right. I'm angry, she admitted. At him, at you, at myself, mostly at myself. Anger is part of healing. Are you angry? She asked. I considered the question. Not anymore. I was for a long time. Angry at your father for what he did. Angry at myself for staying so long. Angry at the situation that made me choose between my own truth and your well-being. But anger is exhausting. Eventually I had to let it go. How? Time, therapy, Charles, finding meaning in other things. I reached across the table, not quite touching her hand but leaving mine open. And hope. Hope that someday you'd come back to me. She took my hand then, tentatively. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. The cruel things I said. The birthdays you missed, the Christmases alone. I'm so sorry. I know, I said simply. I forgive you. I forgave you before you even asked. That's not fair to you, she protested. Love isn't about fairness, I said. It's about choosing connection over correctness. I choose you, Katrina. I'll always choose you. Charles arrived then with Emma, my granddaughter. At 17, Emma looked so much like Katrina at that age, before everything went wrong. Grandma? Emma said hesitantly. Is it okay if I call you that? More than okay, I said, opening my arms. She hugged me carefully, this granddaughter I'd barely known. Behind her, Charles smiled, his own healing evident in the peace on his face. We're going to do Sunday dinners, Katrina announced suddenly. All of us, every week. If you want to, I mean. I want to, I said immediately. It won't be easy, she warned. I'm still processing, still in therapy. Some days I might be angry or distant. That's okay, I said. We have time. Do we? she asked, that fear creeping back in. All the time we need, I assured her. As we sat there, 4 generations reconnecting over coffee and careful conversation, I thought about the price of silence, the cost of truth, and the value of forgiveness. 15 years of pain couldn't be erased in an afternoon, but it could be transformed, slowly, carefully, into something new. "Mom," Katrina said as we prepared to leave, "that thing you said at the lawyer's office about love not meaning accepting abuse, you were talking about yourself too, weren't you?" "Maybe," I admitted. "Good," she said firmly, "because loving us doesn't mean you deserved what happened, from Dad or from me. It was a start, not an ending, not a complete healing, but a beginning. And sometimes that's all we need, the courage to begin again, to choose love over fear, truth over silence, and hope over history." My story doesn't have a fairy tale ending, but maybe that's what makes it real. We can't erase 15 years overnight, but we can choose how to begin again. If you're holding a painful secret to protect someone you love, remember, sometimes the truth, however painful, is better than a compassionate lie. Love shouldn't require you to sacrifice your own truth. If you agree, please like this video. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message about setting boundaries and self-worth, share it with them. Subscribe for more stories about finding courage in everyday life.